In our previous videos, we've been looking at motivation, and we tied motivation to human resource management. Now we're going to take that motivation theory and tie it to leadership. So what does it take to be a leader, and what's the difference between being a manager and being a leader? So as we look at leading, we're going to talk about what is leadership, how do you lead teams, and how is leadership more generically different from leading teams, and then some additional considerations as you are leading in cross-cultural organizations, leading through change, and developing that corporate culture. So let's talk about leaders. Leaders are someone who can influence others and provide vision and strategy to the organization. So who is it that we are trying to be, and how do we get there? They deal with the complexity of keeping the organization running effectively and efficiently. So there's a great tie between leadership and management because, of course, management is related to effective and efficiently running the organization. And we have leaders who are helping people cope with change and transformation of the organization. So we would like our managers to be leaders. So leadership is the process of influencing individuals or groups towards achievements or goals. So if you talk to the Harvard Business Review in terms of what does it mean to be a leader, what is the role of the leader? The role of the leader is to build a unifying vision. So what is the company trying to achieve? Who are they? How will they compete? What are our sources of strength? So here the leader is someone who is going to be a creative thinker. They're able to synthesize ideas and develop a consensus. Then they're going to develop a strategy. So how are we going to go about achieving that vision? What are our customer needs? What is the structure of the market? What are the industry trends? What does the competition look like? So it needs to be someone who can problem solve, analyze, and make decisions. Then once we've developed that strategy of how we're going to get to that vision, we need to get people on board. So here, recruiting and developing, here's that HR management component, the compensation and benefits to get the right people. And in terms of skills, that means coaching, that means selling the idea and getting other people to see that same vision. And then there's the focusing on results. So that's the performance management system. Are we getting the behaviors we want out of our workers? Are we getting the right metrics we need out of the organization? So back to our financial controls, our behavioral controls, how are we doing in terms of achieving our results? That means that the leader is someone who has to have negotiation skills. They need to be able to resolve conflict. They need to be able to motivate individuals. And they need to be innovative. So the leader needs to be one who can look at the current environment and come up with innovations, new ideas, new business models, new markets, new products, new technologies. So they need to be able to manage change, manage conflict, and analyze what's happening and be able to do that creative thinking. And they also need to be able to lead themselves. That is, they have general knowledge of the business, of the industry. They know the external environment. That means they need to have communication skills, emotional intelligence, build trust, and set priorities. So we've already talked about some of these skills and some of these decisions so far this semester. We'll get into that environmental scan in some future videos. We'll look more at marketing and we'll look more at strategy. We'll look at the competitive environment. So that's where we're going next after we finish our discussions on leadership. We've already talked about performance management systems, HR management. We've talked about decision-making and creativity, and we talked about our entrepreneurs. So right now we're going to focus on the role of the leader, theories on leadership, and then we're going to look at how that leadership might be different if you're leading teams. And we'll also look at the issues in terms of the leading change and how you can help people deal with that change aspect and that innovation. So we need to distinguish between managers and leaders. So we would like our managers to be leaders, right? We said previously, if I go back, someone who can influence others and provide vision and strategy to the organization. But there is a distinction between managers and leaders. So leaders create a vision, they set the direction, and managers are the one who are going to implement it. So they're going to do the planning, they're going to do the budgeting. We talked before in a much earlier video about the difference between leaders and managers in terms of leaders are the ones who find opportunity in uncertainty. They are the ones that create change. They are the ones that they're okay with some uncertainty because they're going to find opportunities in it. Whereas a manager is about reducing uncertainty, creating order and predictability. So we would like our managers to be leaders, but we do recognize that there is a distinction between managers and leaders. So let's look at some theories in terms of what does it take to be a leader. So we'll start out with the trait theory on leadership. The trait theories on leadership say that we can isolate characteristics that differentiate leaders from non-leaders. So if we assume that leaders are born with certain characteristics, certain talents, then we could identify, do you have these certain characteristics to be an effective leader? Now, the challenge, of course, with this is that assumes that all great leaders have the same characteristics or skills, and so more modern theories on leadership seem to move away from this trait theory. But if we look at, what are some generally accepted characteristics of effective leaders, they would come down to essentially this 8 here. They have drive. They have a high desire for achievement. So remember in our discussions previously, we talked about the need for affiliation, the need for power, the need for achievement, and we talked about different levels of management. And so lower levels of management were people who are more focused on that need for achievement, and upper levels of management were more people who were focused on that need for power. And so a lot of this ties into that drive component. So if you have a high desire for achievement, and then those who are upper level leadership, right, they have a strong desire to influence others. So that's that need for power. So if we look at leaders, they have drive, they have desire to lead and influence others. Effective leaders are those who can build trust between themselves and the followers. They are people who are self-confident. Okay, so if they look like and act like they know what they're doing, then people are more likely to follow them, right? So they need to have a level of confidence. They have cognitive intelligence, so they're able to gather, synthesize, and interpret large amounts of information, right? Because their job is going to be developing that vision and that strategy. So they're going to need to be able to problem solve, put all these issues and ideas together to create that vision. We find that effective leaders also have emotional intelligence, so they need to be aware of their own emotions and those of others, and that they're able to use those emotions effectively when making decisions. So we'll return to that emotional intelligence in just a moment, but we talked about before in terms of creating change, winning hearts and minds. And so emotional intelligence ties back to that winning hearts part. Are you able to tie into people's emotions when you are, as we said before, right? We need our leaders to create a unifying vision and get people on board. So can you win hearts? That comes from that emotional intelligence in terms of understanding people's emotions and being able to tap into those emotions to convince them to move forward on your vision. You need to have job-related knowledge. Okay, we've talked before in terms of, how important is that job-related knowledge. Effective leaders, how much knowledge do they need to have in terms of some of the day-to-day operations versus management? We talked whose theory? Whose theory was it said it's more important that they know administration than the technical skills? Fail, right? So Fail was more about not so much the technical skills, but more the administration component. So how much do you need them to know in terms of the organization? Well, if they're leading the organization, we would like them to have some knowledge of how all of the parts of the organization work together, even if they may not have the technical pieces from each of the day-to-day operations of the workers. We also want them to be extroverted, right? They're energetic, they're lively people, they're probably charismatic, social, they're sociable, and interact with others. So if we're looking at a traits theory of what characteristics a leader has, usually it comes down to this 8. Let's dive in as before we leave trait theory, just to look a little bit more at emotional intelligence. So when it comes to emotional intelligence, recent studies indicate that emotional intelligence, or EI, is a good predictor of who will emerge as a leader. So if we have a group of people, those with more emotional intelligence tend to rise to the top as the leadership. And there are 5 components to emotional intelligence. So let's make sure we know these components. So emotional intelligence means self-awareness. You know yourself and how you feel about things. So you recognize your own emotions. You have self-management, so you have control over your emotions. You know and can control when you express your emotions, and you express them at appropriate times. Then you have self-motivation. So this is commitment to your personal journey and those who are involved in that journey with you. So the idea here is that you are motivated by a sense of optimism, and that optimism is then imparted on others. So that emotional component that drives you and your journey is essentially contagious. Then we have empathy. So empathy is your ability to understand and acknowledge the emotions of others. So can you recognize others' emotions? And then we have social skills here. Social skills being your ability to connect and interact and tap into those emotions. So we talked about just a moment ago in terms of winning hearts. As you try to persuade others, that would be that social skill aspect of emotional intelligence. Can you tap into others' emotions? So while intelligence and expertise are necessary, emotional intelligence has been found to help make an effective leader. So there is a survey in Pearson Revel on emotional intelligence. And so here this assesses how you are in terms of some of these aspects of emotional intelligence. So if we look at the survey, what it does is it breaks it down to 4 components. I'm just going to move my face out of the way here. So it talks about emotional awareness. So that was the self-awareness we just looked on the other slide. So do you know yourself and your own feelings? Can you recognize your feelings? Here it says the level of awareness of how emotions influence your decisions. Then we have what it calls emotional control, and that is the key aspect we just talked about before in terms of that self-management component. So can you control and express your emotions at an appropriate setting? Then this survey has what it calls emotional diagnosis. So emotional diagnosis, it says, involves being aware of other emotions and is referred to as empathy. So we saw in that previous slide, it listed as empathy. Do you understand and acknowledge other people's emotions? And then the last one it has here is emotional response, an individual's ability to match their emotional intensity with the intensity of others. And so this is the social skills that we saw listed on the previous page. So as you look at your emotional intelligence, how do you do in these 4 categories? So you'll notice with mine, high and low areas non-existent in the others. And so emotional awareness, okay, I'm able to identify how emotions influence decisions, and I'm aware of others' emotions and and I acknowledge their emotions. You'll notice that in terms of emotional control, so the ability to appropriately manage emotions in emotionally charged situations, my score is 0. So I'm not an emotional person. I don't get very worked up about things. And so here it's about, do you express your emotions at appropriate settings? Well, if I'm not very emotional and don't express those emotions at all at any time, then you can see that emotional control is 0. In terms of emotional response, that ability to tap an individual's ability to match their emotional intensity with the intensity of others, this is that ability to weigh and to get emotional when others get emotional to help further your cause. So that's winning hearts. And as we talked about before when we did the assessment on how you convince others, how you manage upward, we talked about how I'm a bit more in terms of winning minds and not so much the winning hearts. And we can see that reflected here too. So when we look at individuals where the emotional control is low or non-existent and the emotional response is low or non-existent, you tend to see people who are more on the autism spectrum. We'll see people like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, where they don't have a whole lot of emotion in terms of what they do. And they're often, when they're trying to win people, it's very much, it's not an emotional response. It's more in terms of a rational response, in terms of here's the pros, here's the cons. And it's more about winning minds than winning hearts. So we can see there the different aspects of the emotional intelligence. Now, when it comes to leadership, we tend to like to see higher emotional intelligence, where you can tap into the emotions of others. There are other roles where having a lower emotional control or emotional response might be preferred. So, for example, in union negotiations, where there can be tendencies for it to get very heated and get very emotional, removing that emotion from it can be effective in terms of reaching a decision, whereas too emotional responses at bargaining tables can make it quite high conflict.